through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Tudor-style home, casting long shadows across the Brazilian cherry hardwood floors. Thomas Bray stood at his favorite spot by the window, coffee mug in hand, taking in the panoramic view of Portland spread out below the West Hills. At 45, he'd built exactly the life he dreamed of 20 years ago. "Dad, have you seen my statistics notebook?" Andy's voice echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of drawers opening and closing. "I swear I left it on my desk last night." Thomas smiled, taking another sip of his coffee. "Check the kitchen counter. You were working on it while eating that late-night sandwich, remember?" A moment later, Andy bounded down the stairs, his dark hair still damp from the shower, basketball tucked under one arm. At 16, he was already nearly as tall as Thomas, with the same strong jaw and determined green eyes. "You're a lifesaver," he said, snatching the notebook from exactly where Thomas had suggested. "Coach Williams wants us at practice 30 minutes early today. Something about new defensive strategies. Need a ride?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. Andy had always been fiercely independent. "Nah, Jackson's picking me up. We're grabbing breakfast at Annie's first." Andy stuffed the notebook into his backpack, then hesitated. "Hey, Dad, thanks for coming to every game. I know you're busy with work and everything, but it means a lot." Thomas felt his chest tighten with pride. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo." "Morning, everyone." Misty's voice carried from the foyer, accompanied by the click of her heels on hardwood. She swept into the kitchen, already dressed for work in a tailored navy suit, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. At 42, she turned heads wherever she went, something Thomas never took for granted even after 17 years of marriage. "You're up early," Thomas noted, passing her a fresh cup of coffee. Misty accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "Meeting with the Children's Hospital Foundation Board. We're planning the summer fundraiser." She turned to Andy. "Don't forget Aunt Lynn and Uncle Kane are coming for dinner tonight. Your cousins have been asking about you all week." "Cool, but I might be a little late." "Student council meeting after practice." Andy checked his phone. "That's Jackson outside. Gotta run." He gave his mother a quick peck on the cheek, grabbed his basketball, and was out the door in a whirlwind of teenage energy. Thomas watched through the window as Andy jumped into his friend's car, the two boys immediately launching into animated conversation. "Sometimes I can't believe how grown up he is," he mused. "Remember when he used to need us to tie his shoes?" "He's always been special," Misty agreed, wrapping her arms around Thomas's waist from behind. "We got lucky with that one." The moment was interrupted by Thomas's phone buzzing. The screen displayed his brother-in-law's name. "Kane's calling. Probably about the Riverside project." Kane's voice came through clear and energetic. "Tom, I just got out of breakfast with the zoning commissioner. You're not going to believe this. They're fast-tracking our permit application. We could break ground 2 months ahead of schedule." Thomas felt his pulse quicken with excitement. When Kane had joined the company 5 years ago, some had questioned Thomas's decision to bring family into the business. But Kane's natural charm and innovative thinking had proved invaluable, helping transform Bray Development from a local success into a regional powerhouse. "That's fantastic news," Thomas replied, already mentally rearranging his schedule. "Let's meet at the office in an hour to go over the timeline." "Actually," Kane said, "I have a lunch meeting with some potential investors. How about 3 o'clock? I'll bring the updated projections." "Perfect. See you then." Thomas ended the call and turned to Misty. "Your brother's done it again. The Riverside project is ahead of schedule." Misty beamed with pride. "I told you Kane would be good for business. He's always had a gift for making things happen." She glanced at her watch. "I should go. The board won't wait, even for the chair's wife." Thomas watched her gather her things, moving with the same grace that had caught his eye at that charity auction 17 years ago. Back then, he'd been a hungry young developer with big dreams, and she'd been the sophisticated art curator who saw his potential. Now, they had everything they'd ever wanted: a beautiful home, a successful business, and most importantly, a family bound by love and trust. Later that morning, as Thomas drove downtown to his office, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of another Bray Development construction crane rising above the city skyline. The Portland Business Journal had recently named him one of the city's most influential business leaders, but that meant far less to him than the quiet moments at home with Misty and Andy, or the satisfaction of working alongside Kane to build something lasting. Life wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but Thomas Bray had come pretty damn close. He pulled into his reserved parking spot at the Bray Development headquarters, ready for another day of building his legacy, completely unaware that the foundation of his perfect life had already begun to crack. The first hint that something was off came during a family dinner in early February. Thomas had insisted on cooking his signature paella, a tradition that dated back to his and Misty's honeymoon in Spain. The kitchen filled with the aroma of saffron and seafood as he worked, occasionally glancing at the gathering in the living room. Misty sat perched on the arm of the sofa, wine glass in hand, laughing at something Kane had just said. She wore a new dress, emerald green, form-fitting that Thomas didn't recognize. Her brother leaned against the fireplace, his usual confident pose somewhat more relaxed than usual, his eyes lingering on Misty a fraction too long. "Dad." Andy's voice broke through Thomas's observations. "The rice is starting to stick." "Right, thanks." Thomas quickly stirred the paella, forcing his attention back to the task at hand. He was being ridiculous, seeing things that weren't there. Kane and Misty had always been close. It was one of the reasons he'd brought Kane into the business in the first place. "Something smells amazing," Lynn called out as she entered through the front door, their twin daughters Emma and Sophie racing ahead of her. At 8 years old, they were bundles of energy, immediately tackling their cousin Andy with squeals of delight. "Careful with the old man," Andy laughed, pretending to stagger under their attack. "I've got basketball practice tomorrow." Thomas watched as Kane moved to greet his wife, noting how the kiss he gave her seemed almost perfunctory. But then again, Kane had always been more reserved with public displays of affection, even among family. "Misty, that dress is gorgeous," Lynn said, settling onto the sofa. "Is it new?" "Just a little something I picked up at that boutique Paige recommended," Misty replied, smoothing the fabric. "Speaking of Paige, we're planning another women's networking event next week. You should come, Lynn. Get away from all those runny noses at the clinic for an evening." Lynn shook her head. "Thanks, but I'm on call that night. Someone has to keep Portland's children healthy while you ladies network." "Their loss is our gain," Kane interjected, his voice carrying a note Thomas couldn't quite place. "More wine for the rest of us, right, sis?" The evening progressed with its usual warmth, but Thomas found himself noticing small details he might have missed before. The way Misty and Kane seemed to communicate without words, exchanging glances across the table. How they both checked their phones more frequently than usual, though neither mentioned any urgent business matters. "Mom, you missed my game last week," Andy said during dinner, his fork pushing rice around his plate. "Coach said it was my best defensive performance yet." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," Misty responded, looking genuinely contrite. "The networking event ran later than expected, but I promise I'll be at the next one." "It's fine," Andy shrugged, but Thomas caught the disappointment in his son's voice. "Uncle Kane made it, at least." Kane cleared his throat. "Actually, I had to leave early. Client emergency." "Really?" Andy's eyebrows rose slightly. "Because I saw you in the parking lot after the game. You were on your phone, but—" "Who's ready for dessert?" Misty interrupted, standing up suddenly. "I picked up a tiramisu from Marco's this morning." Later that night, after their guests had left and Andy had retreated to his room, Thomas found Misty in their en-suite bathroom, removing her makeup. "You've been going to a lot of these networking events lately," he observed, trying to keep his tone casual. Misty met his eyes in the mirror. "Paige says it's important to maintain a strong female presence in the business community. You know how male-dominated real estate can be?" "Of course," Thomas nodded. "I just miss having you around more." "Don't worry," she smiled, turning to face him. "It's just a phase. Everything's fine." But the next morning, Thomas noticed a text notification flash across Misty's phone as it lay on the kitchen counter. "Meeting confirmed for 2 p.m. Same place." The sender was listed simply as P. When he mentioned to Kane during their morning meeting that Misty seemed busy with her networking events, his brother-in-law's response was just a beat too quick, too rehearsed. "You know Misty," Kane said, shuffling papers on his desk. always looking to expand her circle. Speaking of which, I need to reschedule our site visit to the Riverside project. Something came up. Another personal appointment? Thomas asked. Yeah, you know how it is. Kane wouldn't meet his eyes. Life gets complicated sometimes. That evening, as Thomas helped Andy with his calculus homework, his son suddenly put down his pencil and turned to face him. Dad, do you ever notice anything weird about Mom and Uncle Kane? Thomas felt his stomach tighten. Weird how? Just the way they act sometimes. Like they have secrets. Andy hesitated. Last week, before my game, I saw them in the parking lot at Pioneer Square. They didn't see me, but they were sitting in Uncle Kane's car, talking really intensely about something. And when I walked by Mom's home office yesterday, I heard her on the phone with someone, but she hung up really fast when she saw me. Thomas forced a smile he didn't feel. They work together, buddy. Sometimes business requires private conversations. Yeah, maybe. Andy didn't look convinced. But Mom's been different lately. She misses my games, she's always on her phone, and sometimes she looks at you like she's feeling guilty about something. Your mom's just busy with her charity work, Thomas said, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Let's focus on this derivative problem, okay? That night, Thomas lay awake long after Misty had fallen asleep beside him. He thought about the lingering glances, the missed meetings, the secret phone calls. Each incident seemed innocent enough on its own, but together they formed a pattern he couldn't ignore. No, he told himself firmly. This was his family. Kane was his brother-in-law, his business partner, his friend. Misty was his wife of 17 years, the mother of his child. He was seeing shadows where there were none, creating problems that didn't exist. Still, as he finally drifted off to sleep, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something in his perfect life had started to shift, like the first tremors before an earthquake. The March morning dawned gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that matched Thomas's mood as he packed for Chicago. The Windermere development deal could transform Bray Development's reach, potentially opening up an entirely new market in the Midwest. Everything had to go perfectly. Are you sure you can't come? Thomas asked, watching Misty rush around their bedroom, gathering items for what she claimed was an emergency charity event meeting. The realtor said the lakefront views are incredible this time of year. I'm so sorry, darling, Misty replied, not quite meeting his eyes. But Paige is counting on me for this event. You know how these things are. If the chair's wife isn't there, people talk. Thomas nodded slowly, noting how she kept checking her phone. And Kane? He's still not coming either? He mentioned something about local clients. Misty said quickly, too quickly? Besides, you don't need us holding your hand. You were closing major deals long before Kane joined the company. A knock at their bedroom door interrupted any response Thomas might have made. Andy stood in the doorway, already dressed for school, his expression unusually serious. Dad, can I drive you to the airport? Jackson can pick me up from there for practice. Thomas felt a surge of affection for his son. Sure, buddy. Let me just finish packing. The drive to Portland International took longer than usual, traffic snarled by a minor accident on the freeway. Andy was quieter than normal, his hands gripping the steering wheel with unnecessary force. Everything okay? Thomas asked as they finally pulled into the departure lane. Andy put the car in park and turned to face his father. Mom's lying about the charity event. Thomas felt his chest tighten. What makes you say that? I overheard her on the phone with Paige last night. Paige was asking her to help with some event next month. Mom said she hadn't done any event planning since the Christmas fundraiser. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Thomas forced himself to take a steady breath. Maybe there was a miscommunication. Or maybe it's a different event. Dad. Andy's voice cracked slightly. I'm not stupid. Something's going on with Mom and Uncle Kane. The way they look at each other. How they always seem to disappear at the same time. He swallowed hard. I saw them yesterday, at that little coffee shop on 23rd. They didn't see me walking by. They were holding hands under the table. Thomas felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the car. He wanted to deny it, to protect his son from these suspicions, but Andy's eyes held a knowledge too certain to dismiss. I'll figure it out, Thomas said finally, reaching over to squeeze his son's shoulder. Whatever's going on, We'll handle it together, okay? Andy nodded, blinking rapidly. Just be careful, Dad, and come back soon. The flight to Chicago was a blur of spreadsheets and presentation rehearsals, but Thomas couldn't focus. His mind kept returning to Andy's words, to all the small signs he'd been trying to ignore. By the time he checked into the Palmer House Hilton, he felt physically ill with worry and suspicion. Thomas Bray, you look like hell. The familiar voice came from across the hotel bar, where Lloyd Newell sat nursing what looked like a whiskey neat. The private investigator had been Thomas's go-to for background checks on potential business partners for years, his methods discreet but thorough. Lloyd. Thomas slid onto the bar stool next to his old friend. I thought you were in Seattle this month. Wrapped up early. Unfaithful spouse case. Same old story. Lloyd studied Thomas's face carefully. But something tells me you've got your own troubles. Thomas ordered a scotch, then found himself pouring out everything. The missed meetings, the secret phone calls, Andy's observations, the last-minute cancellations for this trip. Lloyd listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly grave. Want me to look into it? He asked finally. Quietly, of course. No one would ever know. Thomas stared into his drink, watching the ice cubes slowly melt. The thought of having his wife and brother-in-law investigated made him feel sick, but the alternative, continuing to live with this gnawing uncertainty, seemed worse. Just keep an eye on things while I'm gone, he said finally. If there's anything obvious, let me know. But don't dig too deep. Not yet. Lloyd nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. Sometimes people surprise us, Thomas. Not always in good ways. That night, alone in his hotel room, Thomas tried calling home. The call went straight to voicemail, Misty's voice, cheerful and professional, asking him to leave a message. He tried Kane's number next, but it too went unanswered. He opened his laptop, intending to review the presentation for tomorrow's meeting, but instead found himself staring at a photo from last year's company Christmas party. Everyone looked so happy, so normal. Kane had his arm around Lynn, while Misty stood beside Thomas, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Andy was there too, grinning between his parents, looking so much like Thomas at that age. The perfect family portrait. When had things started to change? His phone buzzed, a text from Andy. Made it home from practice. House is empty. Mom left a note about the charity event. Thomas typed back quickly. Everything okay? Yeah. Doing homework. Called Aunt Lynn about helping with my biology project. She said Uncle Kane's out at a client meeting. Thomas checked his watch, 9:30 p.m. Portland time. What kind of client meeting happened this late? He pushed the thought away, forcing himself to focus on tomorrow's presentation. The Windermere deal needed his full attention. The next 2 days passed in a blur of meetings, handshakes, and contract negotiations. Thomas threw himself into the work, finding temporary relief in the complex details of development plans and financing arrangements. But each night, alone in his hotel room, the doubts crept back in. Lloyd sent periodic updates, each one carefully worded. Your office says Kane's been taking long lunches. Misty's car spotted at the Pearl District when she was supposed to be at a foundation meeting. They're both being careful with their phones, using Signal for messages. During a break between meetings, Thomas called his son. Any word from your mom about tomorrow's game? He asked, trying to keep his voice casual. She said she might not make it. Andy's disappointment was clear even through the phone. Something about the charity event running long. Dad. I drove past the community center where she said the event was happening. It's closed for renovations this month. Thomas closed his eyes, leaning against the window of his hotel room. Below, Chicago's downtown sprawled out in a grid of lights and shadows. Andy, I need you to do something for me. Don't confront them. Don't let on that anything's wrong. Can you do that? Yeah. Andy's voice was quiet but steady. I can do that. Just come home soon, okay? On his final evening in Chicago, Thomas sat in the hotel bar with Lloyd again, picking at a plate of untouched food. There's more, Lloyd said carefully. My contact at Pacific First Bank mentioned some unusual account activity. A new joint account opened recently. I couldn't get details without raising flags, but... Stop. Thomas held up his hand. I don't want to know. Not yet. He pulled out his phone, looking at his flight details for tomorrow. I need to handle this carefully. For Andy's sake. Lloyd nodded, understanding. Just remember, in these situations, the person who acts first usually has the advantage. Later, lying awake in his hotel room, Thomas thought about his life just 3 months ago, when everything had seemed so perfect. Had he been blind? Or had he simply trusted too much, believed too deeply in the sanctity of family? His phone buzzed with a text from Misty. Miss you. The charity event's been so hectic. Can't wait to have you home. Thomas stared at the message, remembering Andy's words about the community center being closed. Another lie. Another crack in the foundation of their life together. He turned off his phone without replying and began to plan. Whatever was happening, whatever ugly truth awaited him in Portland, he would face it with the same methodical attention to detail that had built his business. Thomas Bray had always been good at playing the long game. As he finally drifted off to sleep, his last thought was of Andy. Strong, perceptive Andy, who saw the truth but had the wisdom to wait, to watch, to protect his father's heart until the right moment. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The red-eye from Chicago touched down at Portland International just before 11 p.m. Thomas's exhaustion from 3 days of intense negotiations disappeared the moment he saw the note on the kitchen counter, written in Misty's flowing script. At the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala with Paige. Don't wait up. M. The house felt eerily quiet. Thomas dropped his briefcase by the stairs and loosened his tie, noticing Andy's basketball shoes weren't in their usual spot by the door. A text message lit up his phone. Practice ran late. Staying at Jackson's to study. Back tomorrow. Something felt off about the message's tone, too formal for his usually casual son. Thomas was about to call when his phone buzzed again. Another text from Andy. Dad, ignore that last message. I sent it in case Mom or Uncle Kane check my phone. I need to talk to you. Something's wrong. Thomas's heart rate spiked. Before he could reply, the phone rang. Andy's voice came through, barely a whisper. Dad, are you alone? Yes. What's going on? I saw them, Dad. Mom and Uncle Kane. Andy's voice cracked. I was downtown with Jackson after practice. We were getting pizza at Pioneer Square when I saw Mom's car pull up. But she wasn't heading to any gala. She was with Uncle Kane. Thomas sank into a kitchen chair, his free hand gripping the edge of the table. Where are they now? I told Jackson I forgot something at school. I followed them. A shaky breath. They're at the Red Moon Hotel. Dad, they were kissing in the elevator. I recorded it on my phone. I'm sending you the video now. Thomas's phone buzzed with an incoming file. His hands trembled as he opened it. The footage was brief but crystal clear. Misty and Kane in an intimate embrace, entering room 803. The timestamp showed 10:47 p.m. Andy, listen to me very carefully. Thomas forced his voice to remain steady. Where are you now? In my car, parked across the street. Should I? No. Come home immediately. Pack a bag with essentials, clothes, passport, your school documents. Don't post anything on social media. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even Jackson. Dad, I'm scared. Andy's voice sounded younger suddenly, reminding Thomas of when he was small. What's going to happen? We're going to handle this together, Thomas promised. But right now, I need you to drive carefully and come straight home. Can you do that? Yeah. I'm leaving now. After hanging up, Thomas sat in the darkened kitchen, the video playing on loop in his mind. All the signs had been there. The missed meetings, the late nights, the secret glances. He'd chosen to ignore them, to trust in family bonds that now felt like chains of betrayal. His phone buzzed again, a text from Misty, gala running late. Having a wonderful time raising funds for the children's wing. Don't wait up. Love you. Another lie. Another manipulation. Thomas thought of Kane's daughters, of Lynn working late at her pediatric practice, unaware that her husband was currently. The sound of the garage door opening snapped him back to the present. Footsteps on the stairs, then Andy appeared in the doorway, his face pale but determined. I have everything important, he said, dropping a duffel bag by his feet. Dad, there's more you need to know. Last week, I overheard Uncle Kane on the phone in his office. He was talking about some kind of takeover, something about proving you were unfit to lead the company. Thomas nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. How long have you suspected? A few months. But I didn't want to believe it. Andy's shoulders slumped. Mom's been different lately. Colder. Sometimes I catch her looking at our family photos like they're props in a play she's tired of performing. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Father and son sat together, their world unraveling thread by thread. Finally, Thomas stood up. Go pack your computer and any external hard drives. We need to document everything. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling Lloyd. As Andy disappeared upstairs, Thomas thought of all the family dinners, the vacations, the shared dreams of expanding the business. Had any of it been real? Or had he been playing a part in someone else's careful production, never seeing the true script until now? The video on his phone seemed to mock him with its clarity. Room 803. His wife and his brother-in-law, their betrayal captured in 30 seconds of damning footage. Sometimes, Thomas realized, the most devastating truths come not in grand revelations, but in small, undeniable moments caught on camera. Lloyd picked up on the first ring. Thomas? I was about to call you. How bad is it? Thomas paced in his home office, keeping his voice low while Andy gathered his things upstairs. You'd better sit down for this. Papers rustled on Lloyd's end. I've been monitoring their financial activities. There's a joint account at Pacific First Bank, opened 8 months ago. Regular deposits, always just under the reporting threshold. And Kane's been busy. He recently purchased property in Mexico through an LLC called Sunset Ventures. Thomas's hand tightened on the phone. 2 years. They've been planning this for 2 years? At least. The property purchase was just the exit strategy. There's more. Lloyd paused. They've been meeting with investors. Your investors. Presenting documents that paint you as unstable. I need names, Lloyd. Times, dates, every meeting. Already compiling them. But Thomas, you need to move fast. Once they realize you know. I understand. Thomas pulled up his banking app. Send everything to my secure email. And Lloyd? Thank you. The next hour passed in a blur of focused activity. Thomas called Franklin Daly, his lawyer, who answered despite the late hour. Frank, remember that contingency plan we discussed last year? I need it activated. Now. The hostile takeover protection? Papers shuffled in the background. Thomas, that's a nuclear option. Are you sure? They're trying to push me out of my own company, Frank. My wife and my brother-in-law. Thomas's voice remained steady, but his hands shook as he typed in transfer codes. I need those documents filed before the markets open. Give me an hour to wake up my team. And Thomas? Don't confront them yet. Let me get everything in order first. Next was Nick Best, his friend who owned a security company. Nick, I need a locksmith. Immediately. Yes, I know what time it is. It's that important. Andy appeared in the doorway, laptop and external drives in hand. Dad? I found something else. He set up his computer on the desk. Last week, I installed a backup program on Mom's laptop when she asked me to fix her email. It's been copying her documents to my cloud storage. Thomas stared at his son, a mix of pride and sadness washing over him. Show me. Andy pulled up a folder filled with spreadsheets and documents. Look at these dates. She's been collecting information about your erratic behavior at board meetings. But Dad, you weren't even at some of these meetings. They're fabricated. Thomas clicked through the files, each one a carefully constructed lie. Send copies to Lloyd and Frank. We need everything documented. His phone buzzed, a text from Jesse Riley, his college friend in Boston. Got your message. Guest apartment is ready whenever you need it. No questions asked. Working methodically, Thomas transferred funds from joint accounts to new, secure accounts. Canceled joint credit cards and ordered new ones. Documented every suspicious transaction from the past 2 years. Downloaded and backed up security footage from their home system. Gathered passports and essential documents. Around 2 a.m., Andy brought him a cup of coffee. The locksmith just finished. All exterior doors have new codes. Thomas looked at his son. So young to be handling this with such composure. Andy, I need to ask you something important. Are you sure you want to be part of this? You could stay with Grandma and... Don't. Andy's voice was firm. I'm not letting you face this alone. Besides, he managed a weak smile. I've always wanted to see Boston. Thomas pulled up his email, booking 2 one-way tickets while Andy gathered their most important photos and hard drives. The house felt different now. No longer a home, but a crime scene where their family's murder had been plotted for years. His phone lit up with confirmation emails. New accounts secured. Credit cards deactivated. Emergency board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. Flight confirmations. Temporary housing arrangements. Each notification marked another severed tie, another step toward their escape. But Thomas knew they weren't finished yet. They needed more evidence, more protection against whatever his wife and brother-in-law had planned. Andy's voice broke through his thoughts. Dad? There's someone at the door. The security camera showed a familiar figure on their doorstep. Paige Cameron stood there, her usual polished appearance disheveled, her expression urgent. Thomas checked his watch. 3 a.m. Whatever brought Paige here at this hour, he had a feeling it would change everything they thought they knew about this betrayal. Thomas checked the security camera feed one more time before opening the door. Paige Cameron stood on their doorstep. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, her designer dress wrinkled. She rushed past him without waiting for an invitation. I should have told you months ago, she blurted out, pacing the foyer. I convinced myself it wasn't my place, that I was imagining things. But tonight, she stopped abruptly, noticing Andy in the living room. Oh God, Andy, I'm so sorry. You're not at the gala, Thomas observed, his voice carefully neutral. Paige let out a bitter laugh. There is no gala. There never was. I've been such a fool, Thomas. All those networking events? They were covers. I helped create them without realizing. She sank onto the nearest chair, her hands trembling. I was at the Red Moon Hotel bar, meeting a client. That's when I saw them. Andy moved closer, phone in hand. I have video. So do I. Paige pulled out her own phone, fingers shaking as she pulled up a recording. They didn't see me in the corner. I recorded everything. Their plans, their timeline, everything. Thomas gestured for Andy to get his laptop. Tell me exactly what you heard. They're planning to present evidence of your mental instability at next week's board meeting. Paige's voice cracked. Kane has been gathering signatures from investors, claiming you've been making irrational decisions, threatening the company's stability. They've forged documents, meeting minutes, even emails. Andy returned with his laptop, setting it up to record Paige's statement. Thomas nodded for her to continue. Misty. Paige swallowed hard. She's been playing the concerned wife, telling investors how she's worried about your state of mind. They've been building this narrative for months. The plan was to force an emergency board meeting, present their evidence, and push for immediate removal of your voting rights. When's this supposed to happen? Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. Monday morning. They already have the votes lined up. Kane's been promising certain board members positions in the restructured company. Paige pulled up more recordings on her phone. Listen, Kane's voice filled the room. Once Thomas is out, we'll restructure the entire operation. The Mexico properties are just the beginning. With him declared mentally unfit, Misty gets control of his shares as next of kin. The board's already on board. They just need the final evidence package. Misty's voice followed. Everything's in place. The fake psychological evaluations, the doctored security footage from his office, the witness statements about his episodes during meetings. No one will question it, especially with his own wife confirming his instability. Thomas watched Andy's face as the recording played, saw his son's hands clench into fists. Andy, step out for a moment. No. Andy's voice was steel. I need to hear this. All of it. Paige looked between them, tears streaming down her face. There's worse. The affair. It's been going on since before Kane joined the company. They planned this from the beginning. Kane's position in the company, the trust they built with investors, it was all orchestrated. Lynn? Thomas asked, thinking of Kane's wife. She has no idea. They used her reputation as a respected pediatrician to add credibility to their story. made sure she was always too busy with her practice to notice anything suspicious. Paige pulled out a USB drive. I downloaded everything from Misty's cloud account while she was distracted. Email threads going back 3 years, bank statements, property records in Mexico. Thomas took the drive, adding it to their growing pile of evidence. Why are you telling us this now? Paige's shoulders slumped. Because tonight I heard them laughing about it. About you, about Andy, about how perfectly their plan had worked. They were celebrating with champagne, talking about their new life in Mexico, how they'd finally be free to be together once you were institutionalized. The word hung in the air like poison. Institutionalized. They weren't just planning to take his company. They were planning to take his freedom. Dad. Andy's voice was quiet but firm. We need to leave. Now. Thomas nodded, his mind racing through the implications. Their carefully gathered evidence had just become even more crucial. Paige, I need you to record an official statement. Everything you've told us, everything you saw and heard. Can you do that? She straightened her shoulders, wiping her eyes. Yes, and I'll testify if needed. I'm done being their unwitting accomplice. For the next hour, they recorded Paige's detailed account. Names, dates, locations, every detail of the conspiracy she had unknowingly been part of. When she finally finished, Thomas walked her to the door. They'll know you warned us, he said quietly. I know. She managed a weak smile. Consider it my penance for not seeing the truth sooner. Go. Get somewhere safe. I'll make sure the board gets copies of everything first thing Monday morning. After she left, Thomas and Andy stood in the foyer, surrounded by their hastily packed bags and gathered evidence. The house that had been their home for so many years suddenly felt like enemy territory. What time's our flight? Andy asked, shouldering his backpack. Thomas checked his watch. 3 hours. Just enough time to finish what needs to be done. They had the evidence. They had the truth. Now they needed to disappear before Misty and Kane realized their carefully constructed plan was about to collapse. The pre-dawn air felt thick with tension as Thomas made his final preparations. On the kitchen counter, he placed 3 items with deliberate care. Sign these, Franklin Daly had said hours earlier, pushing the divorce papers across his desk. We'll file them first thing Monday morning, citing adultery and financial misconduct. Now those papers lay in a manila envelope, alongside a USB drive containing their evidence and a letter Thomas had spent an hour crafting. Asterisk Misty. By the time you read this, the board will have received detailed evidence of your and Kane's activities. All joint accounts have been closed. Any attempt to access company resources will be logged as evidence of further misconduct. Don't try to find us, asterisk. Andy stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, his varsity jacket left hanging in his closet. Too identifiable. Dad? The car's ready. Thomas took one last look around the kitchen where they'd shared thousands of family meals. Family. The word tasted bitter now. Did you check your room again? Thomas asked, though he knew his son's thoroughness. Nothing traceable left behind. Wiped my computer. Factory reset my old phone. Andy managed a weak smile. Those cybersecurity lectures finally paid off. Thomas nodded to their bags by the door, 2 each, containing only essentials. Everything else would be replaced. Their new identities waited in a sealed envelope from Lloyd, along with instructions for accessing accounts under different names. The board meeting starts at 9, Thomas said, checking his watch. By then, we'll be... Don't say where. Andy's voice was firm. Not even here. Smart kid. Thomas had already arranged for their mail to be forwarded to a P.O. box in another state entirely, not Boston, not anywhere near their actual destination. Their new phones, purchased with cash and preloaded with burner numbers, sat ready in their jacket pockets. The security system beeped softly as Thomas entered the final code. After tonight, all codes would be changed, all passwords reset, all traces of their digital life erased. He'd learned from years of business negotiations. The best deals were the ones you walked away from before the other party knew you were gone. Remember, Thomas said as they loaded their bags into the nondescript rental car, if anyone asks, we're headed to Seattle for a college tour. Andy recited their cover story perfectly, taking the scenic route up the coast. Mom's meeting us there later. The sky was just beginning to lighten as they pulled out of the driveway. Thomas caught Andy staring at the house in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "We can get through this," Thomas said softly. Andy straightened in his seat, squaring his shoulders in a way that made him look startlingly grown up. "I know, Dad. We already are." As they turned onto the main road, Thomas's phone buzzed one final time. A text from Lloyd. Documents delivered to board members' homes. Security footage wiped. Airport cameras looped. "You're clear." Thomas powered off the phone, removed its battery, and passed it to Andy, who added it to a bag of electronic parts they dispose of at random stops along their journey. The sun was rising over Portland as they hit the highway, but not in the direction anyone would expect them to take. The perfect life Thomas Bray had built was behind them now, revealed as nothing but an elaborate stage set. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also truth. Sometimes, he realized, you had to lose everything to find out what really mattered. Andy reached over and turned on the radio, keeping the volume low. Neither of them spoke as the city disappeared behind them. They had said everything that needed saying in those frantic night hours. Now it was time to vanish. In the Red Moon Hotel's 8th floor room, Misty's phone lay silenced on the nightstand, multiple missed calls from the board chairman already waiting. By the time she read them, by the time she understood what was happening, her carefully constructed plan would be in ruins. Sometimes the best revenge was simply being gone when your enemies came looking for you. Jesse Riley's Back Bay apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River, but Thomas and Andy barely noticed the view their first week in Boston. They were too busy building their new life piece by careful piece. Phillips Academy Andover loved Andy's transcripts, Jesse said, setting down a stack of enrollment papers on his kitchen counter. The basketball coach nearly fell out of his chair when he saw the game footage. Mid-semester transfers aren't common, but they're making an exception. Andy looked up from his laptop, where he'd been checking the Portland business news. "When can I start?" "Monday." Jesse smiled. "They're even offering you a spot on the varsity team. Though they did ask why you left your old school so abruptly." "Family emergency," Andy replied, the cover story smooth after a week of practice. Mom's illness required immediate specialized treatment in Boston. Thomas watched his son handle the lie with practiced ease, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. At 16, Andy shouldn't have to be this good at deception, this careful with every word. "The temporary apartment's ready," Jesse continued, sliding over another set of keys. "Top floor, secure building, private elevator. The lease is under my company's name." Thomas nodded gratefully. "And the office space?" 15th floor of the Prudential Tower. "I called in some favors. Your East Coast contacts are already lining up meetings." Jesse hesitated. "The Portland News reached them, by the way. They're on your side." Andy clicked on his laptop. "Dad, you should see this. The board's statement just went public." Thomas moved to read over his son's shoulder. The headline was exactly what they'd planned. Bray Development announces emergency leadership changes. The statement was brutal in its clarity. Kane Brooks removed from all positions effective immediately. Full audit of all company financials ordered. Criminal investigation pending into document forgery. Board's complete support of Thomas Bray reaffirmed. Multiple investor lawsuits filed. Lynn's filing for divorce, Andy said quietly, scrolling down. "She's already moved out with the girls." Thomas thought of Kane's daughters, their world upended by their father's actions. "Make sure Lloyd keeps tabs on them. They're innocent in all this." Jesse cleared his throat. "Speaking of Lloyd," he sent an update. "Misty tried accessing the joint accounts this morning. When that failed, she went to the office. Security had already revoked her access." "The investors?" Thomas asked. All 17 of them received copies of the evidence package, including the videos. Jesse's expression hardened. They're not happy about being manipulated. 3 have already filed separate lawsuits. Andy closed his laptop. "Can we see the new apartment?" Thomas recognized his son's need to move, to do something besides watch their old life implode from afar. "Good idea, Jesse." The apartment was on Marlborough Street, a brownstone building with discreet security and neighbors who valued privacy. The unit itself was smaller than their Portland home but felt more secure somehow. 2 bedrooms, study that could be a third, Jesse explained, leading them through. Doorman's an ex-cop. Building has its own generator and security system. And he opened a door off the kitchen, private roof access. They'll maybe save the basketball practice for school, Andy. Andy managed his first real smile in days. It's perfect. Later, after Jesse left, Thomas found Andy in what would be his new room, unpacking his few belongings. Orientation's on Friday, Thomas said. We should get you some new clothes, school supplies. Dad. Andy set down the book he was holding. Are you really starting a new company? Yes. Sustainable urban development. Something I've wanted to do for years, actually. Thomas sat on the windowsill. Your mother and Kane. They were so focused on traditional development, they never saw the potential in green building. They never saw a lot of things. Andy's voice was quiet but steady. Like how much stronger we'd be without them. Thomas looked at his son. No longer a child, but a young man who'd faced betrayal with courage and chosen integrity over family ties. We're going to be okay, you know. I know. Andy gestured to his laptop. The Portland Business Journal is already calling it the scandal of the year. But we're not there. We're here, starting over. Together. Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of the past week finally start to lift. Their old life was gone, but something new was taking shape. Something built on truth rather than lies, strength rather than manipulation. Through the window, the Boston skyline glittered with possibility. Tomorrow, Thomas would begin meetings with potential investors. Andy would tour his new school. They would take their first steps into this new life they'd chosen. For now, though, they simply sat together as the sun set over their new city, the sound of distant traffic replacing the familiar rhythms of Portland. Sometimes, Thomas realized, you had to lose your old dreams to find better ones. Spring in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood painted the streets with cherry blossoms. Thomas stood at his office window in the Prudential Tower, reviewing the latest sustainability report from his new company, Green Harbor Development. The past year's projects had already won 3 Environmental Innovation Awards. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Bray? Lloyd Newell is on line 2. Thomas picked up the phone, noting the Portland area code. Lloyd, it's been a while. Thought you'd want to know the latest. Lloyd's voice carried across the miles. Kane surfaced in Puerto Vallarta. He's trying to sell that beachfront property, but the lawsuits have frozen his assets. And Misty? Still in Portland. Her PI firm stopped looking for you 3 months ago. Seems she's run out of money and allies. Lloyd paused. The board voted to dissolve her remaining shares in the company yesterday. It's officially over. Thomas glanced at the framed newspaper article on his wall. Green Harbor sets new standard in sustainable development. No mention of Portland, no reference to his past. Just recognition for the work he was proud of. There's one more thing, Lloyd added. Paige Cameron sent a letter through Jesse. You might want to sit down for this one. Before Lloyd could continue, Thomas's office door opened. Andy stood there in his Andover uniform, tie slightly askew, a Harvard acceptance letter clutched in his hand. Dad, you're not going to believe. He stopped, noticing the phone. Sorry, I'll wait. No, come in. Thomas gestured to a chair. Lloyd, can you send that letter to our secure address? Andy's here, and he's got news. After ending the call, Thomas turned to his son. Well? Andy's grin lit up the room. Early admission. Full ride. He handed over the letter, Harvard's crimson logo bold at the top. Coach says I might even start as a freshman. Thomas read through the acceptance letter, pride swelling in his chest. In 1 year, Andy had become captain of Andover's basketball team, maintained his perfect GPA, and volunteered at a local youth center. The betrayal that brought them to Boston had only strengthened his determination. We should celebrate, Thomas said, reaching for his coat. That Italian place on Newberry? Actually, Andy shifted, suddenly looking more like the thoughtful 16-year-old who'd helped them escape than the confident 17-year-old he'd become. I got an email from Emma and Sophie. Uncle Kane's daughters? They're struggling. Aunt Lynn's working double shifts to make ends meet. Thomas sat back down. What are you suggesting? They shouldn't suffer for their father's choices. Andy pulled up an email on his phone. Phillips has a scholarship program, and there's a house for sale 3 blocks from us. Before Thomas could respond, his computer chimed with an encrypted email. The letter from Paige that Lloyd mentioned had arrived. "Read it," Andy said quietly. "I have a feeling we need to know." Thomas opened the file, Andy moving to read over his shoulder. Paige's words filled the screen, revealing the final piece of their story. Misty's confession about the long con, how she and Kane had targeted Thomas years ago, seeing his potential success as their ticket to wealth. "They never counted on us, did they?" Andy's voice was steady. "On how strong we'd be together." Thomas closed the email, turning to face his son. "No, they didn't. And you're right about Emma and Sophie." He pulled up his phone. "Let me call Lynn. We can help them quietly through a foundation." Andy nodded, understanding the need for discretion. "I've been thinking about names for it. How about Second Chance Foundation?" Thomas smiled, remembering their own second chance, born from the ashes of betrayal. "Perfect." He gestured to the Harvard letter. "Now, about that celebration." As they walked down Newberry Street that evening, Thomas thought about the path that had led them here. They'd lost a false family but built something real instead. His new company focused on building sustainable futures while Andy prepared to shape his own destiny at Harvard. The final line of Paige's letter came back to him. "They thought they were destroying you, but they actually set you free." Looking at Andy, confident, compassionate, and stronger for all they'd endured, Thomas knew it was true. Sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in fighting back, but in building something better from the ruins of what was lost. A year ago, they'd fled in darkness, carrying only what they could grab. Now they walked in spring sunshine, planning ways to help others find their own second chances. The best revenge wasn't just living well, it was living truthfully, generously, and without fear of the past. The cherry blossoms drifted down around them as they headed toward their favorite restaurant, father and son, survivors and builders, their footsteps sure on the path they'd chosen together. Epilogue. 10 years had carved new lines into the Portland business district. The old Bray development building now bore a different company's name, its once innovative designs looking dated against the backdrop of newer, greener architecture. Among these newer buildings stood the crown jewel of Green Harbor Development's West Coast expansion, a 40-story marvel of sustainable engineering that had just won its 7th international award. Thomas Bray, now 55, stood in his Boston office, watching a video call with his executive team. The Portland project manager was presenting the final touches to their latest development. Harvard's Environmental Architecture department wants to use it as a case study, the manager explained. Professor Andrew Bray specifically requested access for his graduate students. Thomas smiled at the mention of his son. At 26, Andy had completed his MBA after earning his undergraduate degree in environmental engineering. He now split his time between teaching at Harvard and heading Green Harbor's innovation division. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Bray? Lloyd Newell is here." Lloyd had aged well, his investigative skills only sharpened by time. He settled into a chair by Thomas's desk after the video call ended. "I promised Andy I'd update you both," Lloyd said, pulling out his tablet. "He's in a faculty meeting, but he'll join us online." A window popped up on Thomas's screen, showing Andy in his Harvard office. "Hey, Dad," Lloyd. "Is this about the Mexico situation?" Lloyd nodded. "Kane Brooks died last week. Heart attack on his small fishing boat off Puerto Vallarta. Local authorities found him 2 days later." Thomas absorbed the news silently. Kane had spent the last decade hiding from various lawsuits, scraping by on whatever he could salvage from his frozen assets. The beachfront property he'd bought for his planned escape with Misty had been seized years ago. "What about his daughters?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. "Emma and Sophie are fine," Andy replied. "They're both finishing medical school now, thanks to the Second Chance Foundation. Aunt Lynn's pediatric practice is one of Boston's most respected." The foundation, initially created to help Kane's daughters, had grown into a major force for educational support and second chances. Neither Emma nor Sophie knew their anonymous benefactor was the man their father had tried to destroy. "And Misty?" Thomas's voice was steady, professional. Lloyd pulled up another file. "Still in Portland. The last lawsuit finally settled 6 months ago. She's working as a real estate agent for a small local firm, the only place that would hire her after the scandal." She tried to restart her art curator career, but he shrugged. The Portland social circle has a long memory. The screen split to show another incoming call, Jesse Riley, now Green Harbor's chief strategy officer. Thomas, Andy, you should see the latest Business Weekly. They're running a feature on sustainable architecture pioneers. You're both mentioned. The article appeared on their screens, From Betrayal to Brilliance. How father-son team revolutionized green development. The piece detailed their journey from Portland to Boston, though the personal details remained private. What mattered was their work, their impact, their legacy. There's more, Lloyd said quietly. Paige Cameron sent this yesterday. A new document appeared. Misty's handwritten confession, finally completing the story they'd learned pieces of over the years. She detailed how she and Kane had targeted Thomas in their 20s, seeing his potential. Kane had intentionally stayed away for years before joining the company, building his own reputation. Every step had been calculated, every relationship weaponized. She's trying to sell her story to publishers, Lloyd explained. But no one's interested. The business world has moved on. Green development is the future, and you two wrote that story instead. Andy's expression remained thoughtful. Emma and Sophie should see this. They deserve to understand their father's choices, now that they're old enough. Thomas nodded, remembering the scared teenage girls who'd lost everything. The foundation hadn't just funded their education. It had given them a chance to become something different from their father's legacy. Emma was specializing in pediatrics like her mother, while Sophie had chosen trauma surgery. Send it through their mother, Thomas decided. Lynn's always protected them while telling them the truth. She'll know how to handle this. After the calls ended, Thomas walked to his window. The Boston skyline had changed too over the decade, many of the new buildings bearing Green Harbor's distinctive sustainable designs. Each one represented not just business success, but a victory over the betrayal that had driven them here. His phone buzzed with a text from Andy. Dinner tonight? Emma's defending her thesis next week. We should discuss increasing the foundation's medical scholarship program. Thomas smiled, remembering the teenager who'd risked everything to tell his father the truth. Andy had grown into a man who turned that truth-telling into a mission, using their success to help others rebuild broken dreams. Another message arrived, this one from Jesse. Lynn's annual charity gala next month. The girls want you to attend this year. Time to step out of the shadows? Perhaps it was. After all, Emma and Sophie had proven themselves far different from their father. They'd faced their family's scandal head-on and chosen a better path. Thomas thought about Kane's death, about Misty's fall from grace, about the perfectly planned betrayal that had backfired so spectacularly. The architectural magazines called Green Harbor's buildings monuments to sustainable future, but Thomas knew they were really monuments to resilience, proof that betrayal couldn't destroy you unless you let it. His phone buzzed again. A news alert. Former Portland socialite Misty Brooks files for bankruptcy. The article mentioned her failed attempts to rebuild her life, the social isolation, the lost opportunities. She had spent a decade watching her ex-husband and former stepson rise to national prominence while she faded into obscurity. Thomas closed the alert without reading further. The revenge they'd achieved wasn't in Misty's downfall or Kane's lonely death. It was in the lives they'd built, the people they'd helped, the future they'd shaped. The Second Chance Foundation had helped dozens of students besides Emma and Sophie, each one a testament to the power of choosing integrity over betrayal. Dad. Andy stood in the doorway. He must have driven up from Harvard. The foundation board meeting starts in an hour. Ready to review those new scholarship proposals? Thomas grabbed his coat, leaving the news about Kane and Misty behind. Their story had ended years ago in that Portland house. This was a different story, one about building rather than breaking, about transforming betrayal's wounds into wisdom. As they walked to the meeting, Andy mentioned casually, Emma and Sophie have been asking about you. Not directly, but they figured out where their support came from. They're not angry, Dad. They're grateful. Thomas thought about Jesse's text, about stepping out of the shadows. Maybe it was time. After all, the best revenge wasn't just living well. It was living openly, generously, showing the world that betrayal could become a blueprint for something better. Let's talk about it over dinner, he said. The Italian place on Newberry? Andy grinned. the expression so similar to his teenage self that Thomas felt the years collapse. Perfect. And Dad? Thanks for showing me that the right way isn't always the easy way. As they stepped into the spring sunshine, Thomas realized that the greatest victory wasn't in watching their betrayers fall. It was in rising so far above the betrayal that it became nothing more than a distant chapter in a much greater story. The cherry blossoms were blooming again in Back Bay, marking another year of growth, of change, of choosing to build rather than break. Sometimes, Thomas had learned, the deepest wounds could become the strongest foundations if you were brave enough to build something new upon them. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.